All right. Hopefully, sorry, I wanted to fix some stuff. Hopefully things are much better now. We're looking at the right screen. Okay. So the process of inflammation. So you come in, you stab yourself, and now bacteria comes in along with it. Okay. Um, okay. First thing. Okay. Chemicals such as histamine, kinin, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, cytokines, okay, are released by the damaged cells. Okay, what actually happens, okay, is okay, the histamines and the prostaglandins, okay, causes redness and swelling. The redness and swelling is because there's more blood now going to the capillary beds nearby. Okay, there's more fluid, and that fluid starts to leak out, okay, into the surrounding tissue. That's where the heat comes from, the redness comes from, that's where the swelling comes from. That the whole point of all of that, okay, is to kind of flush out all the bacteria. And if these bacteria have toxins and stuff, then you're diluting the toxin right away with a lot of fluid. Okay. The next thing that happens really is because these capillaries are open wider, it allows the white blood cells to crawl through easier, so they get to the site of infection easier. Okay, and so there's also the signaling by the leukotrienes and stuff. Okay, that causes the cells, the kinins and leukotrienes. They actually cause the neutrophils and eventually the macrophages to get to the site of infection where they can kill the bacteria. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. All of this will happen under the loose connective tissue. So they crawl out and they kind of kill off everything they can. Okay. Okay. So now let's watch the video.
Damage to the body's tissues through heat, chemicals, sunburn, cuts, or microbial infections triggers a general.
Okay. Sorry, I must stop the recording.
General, nonspecific defensive response called inflammation. Signs and symptoms of inflammation include redness, pain, heat, swelling, and sometimes loss of function. Inflammation has three main functions: to destroy the agent causing injury, to limit the effects of the agent on the rest of the body, and to repair or replace damaged tissue.
Damaged cells release several chemicals, such as histamines, prostaglandins, and leukotrienes. Certain components of the complement system can also stimulate the release of histamines. One function of these chemicals is to cause vasodilation, an increase in the diameter of arteries and arterioles. Vasodilation results in more blood and therefore more phagocytes, oxygen, and nutrients being delivered to the site of injury. This increased blood flow results in redness, heat, and some of the pain associated with inflammation. The histamines, prostaglandins, and leukotrienes also have a direct effect on the capillaries in the area of the injury. They cause the walls of the capillaries to open and become leakier. This allows more fluid to leave the capillary and enter the tissue spaces, causing swelling or edema. The increased blood flow delivers phagocytes, such as monocytes and neutrophils, to the scene. The phagocytes stick to the walls of the blood vessels in a process called margination, then squeeze through the gaps between the cells in a process called emigration or diapedesis. Within about an hour of tissue damage, the phagocytes begin to destroy the invading microorganisms by phagocytosis. After engulfing large numbers of microorganisms and damaged tissue, the phagocytes die, forming pus. Other components of the blood lead to the formation of blood clots, which seal off the site of injury. The final stage of inflammation is tissue repair. The increased delivery of nutrients and oxygen from vasodilation aids in this process.
Okay, so marginalization, you guys already know. Diabetes, you're already talking about as well. So you guys already see all this. Okay, tissue repair. Okay. All right, fever. Okay. So fever, by definition, I'm sure you guys know, is abnormally high body temperature. The hypothalamus has a set point. That set point is roughly 37 degrees, and actually a little bit lower than that. Okay, but when there's an infection, you want to strike a fever. The cytokines cause the hypothalamus to release prostaglandins, which increase the thermostat, basically. They increase the hypothalamus to reset the higher temperature. Okay, the body maintains higher temperature until the cytokines are eliminated. Okay, as the body temperature fails, okay, it falls, vasodilation and swelling occur. I think one of the weirdest effects of this is that you see people who are freezing to death and they literally like strip themselves naked right before they're freezing to death, and that means they feel really hot even though their temperature is really cold. Okay. Okay. The reason for the fever, which they don't mention here, is your body can function at higher than normal temperature. The bacteria can't. So hopefully it gives your body an advantage to fight off the bacteria. That being said, too high a fever will actually make you miserable, and higher than that will make you sick and die. Okay. Okay, so major components of the complement system. Okay, so let's talk about what the complement system is. Okay, there are serum proteins that are produced in the liver. Okay, and they're activated in a cascade called the complement activation. Okay, so here's the complement. Okay.
The complement system is a set of proteins that circulate in the blood serum. When activated, these proteins work together to destroy foreign cells by cytolysis, to activate the inflammatory response, and to assist in phagocytosis. The main components of the complement system are called C1 through C9.
Okay, so
Complement can be activated through three different pathways: the classical pathway, the alternative pathway, and the lectin pathway. The classical pathway was the first activation pathway of the complement system to be discovered. The classical pathway begins when a pair of antibodies attach to antigens, such as proteins or a large polysaccharide on the surface of a bacterium. The antibodies bind and activate C1. C1 then cleaves several copies of C2 and C4. Together, the C2A and C4B fragments form an enzyme that cleaves C3, activating the complement system. The alternative pathway of complement activation was so named because it was discovered after the classical pathway. While the classical pathway requires antibodies specific to the invading microorganism, the alternative pathway requires 3 complement proteins called factor B, factor D, and factor P, or properdin. These proteins are attracted to microbial cell surface material, such as the lipid carbohydrate complexes of certain bacteria and fungi. Together with C3, these proteins result in the cleavage and activation of C3 proteins, which in turn activate the rest of the complement system. The most recently discovered pathway of complement activation is the lectin pathway. When macrophages ingest material through phagocytosis, they release chemicals that stimulate the production of carbohydrate-binding proteins called lectins. The lectins bind to distinctive patterns of carbohydrates on the surfaces of certain bacteria and viruses. The lectins themselves can act as opsonins for phagocytosis, but also activate C2 and C4, which leads to the activation of C3, leading to the activation of the rest of the complement pathway.
Okay. So there are 3 separate pathways. But honestly, the most important part of it, is the C3 binding to it. And that, I'm more concerned you guys understanding the outcomes in the 3 different pathways. The outcome of it is 3 different things: cytolysis, opsonization, and inflammation. Cytolysis, it forms something called a membrane attack complex. And this is what a membrane attack complex looks like. It forms a big hole. And what these holes do is it causes the fluid from inside the bacteria to leak out and die, and that causes the bacteria to die. So when you have enough complement, they form together to puncture a hole, and that hole in the side of the membrane causes the bacteria to die. The other thing is the complement factors themselves are opsonins. They attract macrophages. Like antibodies, they attract macrophages. And last one, these the 3A, actually activates, inflammation responses. So the 3A part comes off and activates histamine. Histamine causes vasodilation. The 5A actually attracts macrophages and neutrophils. So these 3 ways are the way complements work. I'm much more concerned with that than I am the 3 different pathways.
Once the complement cascade is activated, several events occur that ultimately result in the destruction of the pathogen. C3A and C5A act as chemotactic factors, attracting phagocytes to the site of infection. C3A and C5A also bind to mast cells, triggering the release of histamine and other chemicals as part of inflammation. C3b acts as an opsonin, coating the invading cell. This coat makes it easier for the phagocyte to adhere to the invading cell during phagocytosis. C5b binds to C6 and C7, which attach to the plasma membrane of the invading cell. C8 and several C9 molecules bind to the C5b, C6, C7 complex, forming a cylinder-shaped membrane attack complex, or MAC. The MACs form circular holes in the membrane of the invading pathogen, causing water to enter the cell and ions to leave. This results in cytolysis, killing the cell.
Cool. All right. So you skip this, okay. So obviously this is a huge component of immune factors. So if you lose a complement protein, and this works at cascade, so if you lose one, you lose the rest of the cascade. So platinum complement causes susceptibility to infections, okay, and therefore also you don't want to have complement around all the time. That's why you always see these cascades, okay, because then you can stop the cascade very quickly, and you can break down the you know how they've broken down little two pieces. You break down the little pieces very quickly, and so once that whole thing is over, you want it to end. You don't want active complement floating around for too long, okay. Okay. Okay, so interferons. Okay, interferons are cytokines that are produced by cells that are infected. Okay, so interferon alpha, interferon beta, okay, are produced by cells in response to viral infections. They don't protect the cells that are infected. They cause the neighboring cells to produce antiviral proteins that inhibit viral replication. They also cause the neighboring cells to tone down the pathways that viruses usually use to get into the cell. So you turn them off for a while. So it's like turning off the lights or something like that to prevent. In World War II, you turned off the lights to prevent getting bombed, right? So that's the way it works. Okay. Okay. So here's the infecting cell. Here you make gamma interferon. So you kind of make antiviral proteins that prevent the viral RNA from working on other cells, not on yourselves. Okay. 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 Like I said earlier, I think a couple chapters ago, iron binding proteins prevent bacterial access to iron. I said iron is very important in bacteria. So you need to not have any free iron. Okay. One of the most important things you want to do is limit the access to iron. So these transferrin, lactoferrin, ferritin, ferrous is iron, so all of them have the ferrin in there. Okay. 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 Antimicrobial peptides. Okay. Are short peptides that are produced in response to protein and sugar molecules on microbes. They inhibit cell wall synthesis. They form pores in bacterial membrane. Okay. Other factors: genetic resistance, age. Okay. Observing healthy protocols. Let's see. Wearing masks, social distancing, and washing your hands. Very important for spread. Okay, the age, the very young and the elderly are more susceptible to disease. To quote one of my favorite shows, Dr. House, the newly bred and the newly dead are much more susceptible to disease. Okay, And you see that playing out in the pandemic right now, okay? Most of the people who are dying are the very old. The very young in this case are actually, the very young are probably less immune than kids, okay? But they usually don't go out very much anyway, and so there's very low, they're not showing up in the death tolls. But the very old, you see, are really kind of susceptible. Also, for the very young, they also have the lower levels of ACE receptor, which, in case you haven't heard, is the receptor that's responsible for fighting COVID-19. So they have less of it, so they won't get as much disease. Okay. All right. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. And I'll see you guys for chapter 17.